interrelationship between institutions and arts. And when I am talking about arts, I am talking about performing arts mostly, and to a limited extent, even fine arts. So, why are institutions important to arts? Again, I will start with a story from my childhood. When we were young, when we were children in the village, every year during the spring season, in my village especially, and in villages nearby, a bunch of performers, a bunch of Nautanki performers would turn up at a certain fixed time and camp in the village, in the mango orchards, and perform. Nautanki, their own version of Nautanki. Not the Nautanki of the Kanpur variety, but their own version of Nautanki. And these Nautankis were obviously, most of them were threaded together from old stories, Upanishads and so on and so forth. First time I heard of Raja Harishchandra and his son Rohitashva and what happened to them was from this Nautanki. And it used to be very popular in the villages because, remember, also those were different days. There was cinema, but it was in the town. It was in the city, a little away from the village. And number two, even if the ticket was 1 rupee or 50 paise or 1 rupee 50 paise, whatever, it used to be a ticketed show. Whereas this Nautanki was free. It was free for anyone to go there to the mango orchard and watch it. And the only thing that people used to do was, the so-called slightly better off peasants in the village, they would provide the meals to the players in the Nautanki. And everything else was voluntary. Everything else, even in terms of voluntary contributions. So, this was, I would call Nautanki a performing art. This must have been happening, this thing with the mango orchard for decades together. But over a period of time, as I grew up and I moved away from my village for my high school and so on and so forth, when I went back during my college years, I inquired from my people in the village, and they told me that they had disbanded altogether, completely. No Nautanki comes to the village now. Never. No one even knows of whether they exist now or not. So, I always used to wonder whatever happened to those whole world of Nautanki. How must they be fending for themselves? If they're wound up here, I'm sure they would have wound up everywhere else. And world of television had invaded the Indian population just around that time in the 70s. It hadn't, of course, every household could not afford a television set, but it had already come. Cheaper access to cinema had become available, so on and so forth. But whatever reason, that Nautanki had to fold up. So, the second question which came up in my mind was, I talked about this in my last lecture, was the status of art house cinema, the one which I did not talk about in the last lecture. art house cinema as it prospers in the Western world. You can see Godfather in one theater, and in the next theater you could be seeing a Fellini film or a Godard film. So that is the kind of access, and that is the kind of popularity that art house cinema enjoys. It is still not popular cinema, but it is well subscribed. That's all that I can say. So all these arts have had a role in society, and they have been supported by people, and that's how they have survived. But just simple support of people by itself does not suffice for these arts to sustain themselves. And that is where the need for an institutionalized kind of support comes in. I talked at length about the Cannes Film Festival and the kind of place it has found itself in the world. It is through the institutionalization, through that institutionalization of the world of art house cinema, that Cannes Film Festival has found its rightful place, has found its predominant place in the world of culture in this world. And so therefore, it is very important that support to arts is institutionalized. Now, when you talk about institutions, it is also important to remember that they have a very seminal role to play in your cultural consciousness and your cultural sensibility. These famous sociologists like Milton Singer, Robert Redfield, they talked about the great tradition and the little tradition. And the great tradition, I do not know how many of you know, the great tradition is passed on through your epics, to the next generation. But if the next generation is completely unaware of the epics, then there's a role which is played by performing arts or even the world of cinema in passing on those stories and keeping them alive. Whereas the little tradition is the world of oral tradition, stories that are passed on orally, from your grandmother to your mother to you, and so on and so forth. So in the world of great traditions, the importance of performing arts is so very seminal, because it is through the performing arts that we learn of our great tradition. In today's time, it acquires extra significance because we go onto the rooftops and shout so much about our cultural nationalism. But what is it that we do to actually fortify this cultural nationalism, or at least to weed out unnecessary elements from this cultural nationalism? Cultural nationalism has to be of necessity an integral part of a nation's life. There is no doubt about it. Without cultural nationalism, a nation's life is bereft of any vibrance, so to say. But how does it sustain itself? It is, through support to institutions. Now, when we talk about institutions and support to the arts, then there is an alliteration I always use कि कलाओं को संस्थाओं की जरूरत क्यों पड़ती है? Why do arts need institutions? So I say संबल, संरक्षण और संवर्धन. संबल, support, संरक्षण, patronization, and patronship, and संवर्धन, to enrich the domain of arts. Each of these each of these needs to be institutionalized within our society for them to not die the way the performers of Nautanki died, or the way Nautanki of my village died, or Nautanki of all other such villages died. Well, again, the kind of institutions that you need, for example, I'll give you a small example. Indian cinema, we talk about, we never tire of posting about the greatness of Bollywood and its dance and song and dance sequences, which have found audiences abroad also. आप कहीं भी यूरोप में किसी इंडियन पार्टी में चले जाएंगे तो वहाँ पे लोग बड़े फख्र के साथ बॉलीवुड डांस करते हैं. Until about 20 years back, when I was in Germany at a reception thrown by the Indian ambassador, I didn't realize how popular this Bollywood song and dance sequences were. But anyway, apart from the popularity of Bollywood song and dance sequences, what is important to note is that the screenplay, the stories of our, especially Bollywood films, suffer from very long, very old malaise, and which is that they die out. They die out midway through. Your interest is not sustained in a consistent way throughout the film. And we had examined this aspect of Indian cinema when I had joined the Film Institute, and together with a whole lot of filmmakers, we went into a kind of brainstorming, and it was found that despite the fact that Indian cinema is so threaded into the sensibility of the Indian people, this whole thing of writing for cinema, screenplay writing, whatever you may call it, it is never taught. It is not taught anywhere. And maybe that is where the whole story comes from. I mean, just imagine the very bulwark on which your cinema rests, that is supported by such a small, that is lacking in such an important ingredient of the final product. And that is where we decided to start the screenplay writing course way back, say this is about 20 years back, and then subsequently it has been taken up in a couple of other institutions, and yet we do not have enough number of institutions teaching screenplay writing or screenwriting. Whereas, if you talk about any other filmmaking nation, any other substantial filmmaking nation, not just in numbers but in terms of their presence, international presence, you will find that this is one of the prime requisites for their national cinema. National cinema is a concept which again I would not veer into, because that is something which will again take a lot of time. But suffice it to say that even small countries like South Korea, I talked about the competition section in the Cannes Film Festival. Even South Korea has a presence every year in the competition section, almost. I mean, I'm not sure every year, all the way from 1945 or 46 when the festival started, but from the late 70s, late 80s, early 90s, definitely. A country like Iran, Abbas Kiarostami and Asghar Faridi and Farhad Asghari and so many other people, small nations, today you have the luxury of having something called over-the-top platforms. But if you look at Netflix, for example, you will be able to scan through some of these nations which are putting out world-class films, despite not having even fraction of their population that we have. So that again takes me back to another story which has a parallel in the world of sport. PK Banerjee, the famous football coach, I think this film Maidan has been made around him. I don't know. I haven't seen Maidan. There's a lot of buzz about that film, but PK Banerjee was with me in a certain event. This is way back again, 20-30 years back, and we were all talking about Indian sport and football and so on and so forth. So PK Banerjee stood up and he made a very pertinent point. He said, we thump our chest and say we do not produce enough sporting luminaries and so on and so forth. But tell me one thing. You keep shouting from the rooftop that we are a country of, at that time of course, we hadn't reached 100, a billion, I'm talking about the early 90s, but whatever, 800 or 900 million. He said, tell me, what is the total number of your playing population? What percentage of your population is able to play football? Forget about availability of football grounds, that is another question. How much of your population is able to play, is able to lay its hands on that sport? So that again has a parallel. He said, a small Scandinavian country has more players of football than your whole of West Bengal, and any other sport. It's as true for any other sport in India. Maybe not cricket, but cricket, because there are just 20 odd cricket playing nations, we figure somewhere in the top 4, and then we, cry hoarse about how good we are in the world of sports. So, these fallacious notions of our ability can be very demeaning to our ego, especially when you are pitted against the best in the world. So, I came back to this point because there's again such an innate, intricate relationship between performance in the world of sports and performance in the world of performing arts and the kind of support it gets from institutions. So, I talked about Sambal, Sanrakshan, Sambardhan. So all of this, takes a different form depending on what kind of arts we are talking about. So, let's say we are talking about performing arts. So in the world of performing arts, the kind of support that is required, would come from government support, public institutions, commercial institutions, and private institutions. So there is enough enthusiasm for finding support, but actual support we do not get. Again, it's a similar parallel to the world of culture. Beyond all that rooftop shouting that takes place in the newspapers, if one of our weightlifters, manages to clinch a bronze medal in the Olympics, then full page coverage is given. That is fine. That is encouragement. That is an encouragement to the sports person. But when we come to the question of institutional support, how much is there? How much of it are we able to extend to either in the performers, either in the world of sports, either field sports or faculty, or team games, whatever. Similarly, in the world of culture, institutions are important because there is not enough coming from other sources. Of course, there are some corporate corporate bodies which sponsor football teams now, and a couple of them which also sponsor the IPL. And of course, there's no dearth of sponsors for IPL because it gets so many more eyeballs. But beyond that, you go around looking for sponsors for your weightlifting team or your wrestling team. You would come up against such disappointment, come back with such disappointment you can't even imagine. Now, so therefore, the support of institutions, whether they are public institutions or private institutions or commercial institutions, is so very important. And as I had said about public institutions, it is their support, their presence in the world of performing arts is so much more important than presence of institutions of other kinds, because it is the public institutions which are able to sieve out the best talents from the society. Because again, there's that very crucial element of no barriers to entry into public institutions, apart from being able to qualify, apart from merit which can pit you above another person, and so then you are pitted against one above you, then another above you, and that's how you progress. That's how you refine your hone your skills, and you improve your ability to do better in that sport. So this is very essential in the field of culture, that we find that kind of institutional support. Unfortunately, I talked about the meager allocation that the state provides, and that has been the story since independence. In fact, things have become much better now, with a little more consciousness, but not decidedly better. So with that kind of allocation for the world of culture, there's very little that you can hope to do in terms of world-class quality. But I always keep talking about this when I have an opportunity to speak with people in this world, and I give the example of theatre, for example. What is the status of theatre in India? Now, again, you go to a good theatre show in London, for example. If you land up in West End, which is the hub of theatre in London, you land up in West End, and if you expect to get a ticket for a show on the same day, I'm sorry, you'll be disappointed. And the tickets are nothing less than, I think the lowest ticket is never less than £25. You can convert it into rupees and you can figure out what it costs, but that is the lowest. And there's just not one theatre. West End has a whole, is the hub of theatre, just as Broadway is in New York, and so on and so forth. So that is how you can have a Lion King playing for years together in the theatres of Broadway, and several other plays that I can take names of. So that is a totally commercial support, a support coming from the commercial domain, and it has been institutionalized. But the first major imperative for that kind of support is professionalization. Professionalization of theatre, which has unfortunately not taken place in our country. The small little segments here and there in Bombay, for example, you have the Prithvi Theatre, but Prithvi Theatre is not even 3/4 of the number of people who are sitting here. That is the kind of audience space it has. So, but Prithvi is a professionally run theatre which is booked all around the year. But one Prithvi for a population of 1.4 billion, that is the kind of proportion, that is the kind of numbers that we are looking at. So, that those poor Nautanki players, they would have to obviously wind up because over a period of time they had no sustainable support from an institution, and they could not rely on the goodwill of individual villagers, which they could not sort of count on a regular basis. So that's a very important parallel between these two worlds. People talk about possibilities. I have a friend by the name Firoz Abbas Khan. Firoz Abbas Khan is this filmmaker also, but he's essentially a theatre person. Firoz Abbas Khan, about 8 years back, made Mughal-e-Azam, the film, into a play. He did a play out of Mughal-e-Azam. And the first time it was played out in Delhi, it was of course first played in Mumbai in the NCTA Tata Theatre, because it needed a huge performing space. But subsequently it came to Bombay, and they performed in a huge hall next to the Asian Games stadium near Pragati Maidan. And because he's a very dear old friend who also has been a filmmaker, he made that film on Gandhi's son, Harilal. I don't remember the name. There are a couple of other films that he's made. So people talk about possibilities, because it was Mughal-e-Azam and he was doing a play out of Mughal-e-Azam, and one of the major performers who played the role of the lady in Mughal-e-Azam, this actor called Priyanka Barve, who's a trained classical musician, who sang on stage. It was not as if there was any recorded music. And can you even guess, and I'm talking about 8 years back, can you even guess what the lowest ticket cost for the play was? We talk about possibilities. The lowest ticket was 8,000 rupees. 8,000 rupees for Mughal-e-Azam. Firoz Abbas Khan, Mughal-e-Azam. I'm sure none of you would be aware of this. Only people who had a close brush, with Delhi theatre or with the world of theatre in Delhi would be aware of this. And he did not one, two, but more than a dozen shows in Delhi. So it was all possible because Firoz found, of course, the sponsors to begin with, but of course he made enough money from the shows, but also because he, took it to that level of professionalization where nothing would go wrong. Imagine an actor performing. It is like somebody, who's performing in a Brecht play where, you have to sing and dance and, perform with other people, but in most moments you are alone. In most moments you are alone. So, but then Firoz, being the director that he is, he managed to pull it off. And 8,000 rupees, and the highest ticket in the front rows was 25,000 rupees. So that is possible. I'm talking about this. I would not have needed mention of this Firoz Abbas Khan's Mughal-e-Azam had it not been for this particular point that I wanted to make, that things are possible. It has to be complemented with, number one, the right kind of professionalization and the right kind of platform that you are performing on. And that platform also means that it should have access and reach to the viewing public, the audience, the possible audience. So, talking about professionalization, I don't know how many of you have seen this film called Tick, Tick, Boom, Boom. Go back and see it. Have you seen it, young lady? So, You've seen this film? Yeah. So, film is all about the angst of performers, just how it sort of can lead to intensive angst in performers, and that is the kind of emotion that you need to develop before you can even imagine becoming a full-fledged professional. So, there are several other imperatives, and another imperative that is very necessary is, of course, on the road to professionalization, is that there should be intensive preparation and also adequate apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is so very important in the world of professionals. You can't stand alone and say, no, I'm a good actor, I'll develop on my own. You need to learn. Learning in an institution is so much better, is so much more preferable to learning from an institution, from an individual, from a coach, from a guru. Because what happens? In an institution, especially a public institution, when you go, then, there are several people, there are several teachers. Like in the university, you have several teachers. Can you imagine doing by the time you go up to doing your PhD, it's a different story. But before that, can you imagine yourself developing as a composite, as a, somewhat well-rounded intellectual, studying just from one teacher? It's because you're given the opportunity to imbibe the influences of several teachers, imbibe the impulses from several people who are around you, your friends, students, and so on and so forth. That is how you evolve in a composite fashion as a student. So that is so much more important. And again, performing institutions, there are several platforms which double up as performing institutions, and some of them can play a very, very important role in chiseling your career, chiseling your performing ability. I remember there was this classical Hindustani classical vocalist. There is Hindustani classical vocalist. I had hired him to teach my students at the Film Institute, to give them voice training. So over the course of years, those 4 or 5 years that I was there in the institute, he became a very close friend. And many years thereafter, one day he rang me up from Pune and he said, "Sir, आप आइए ना इस बार पुणे, मैं सवाई गंधर्व में इस बार परफॉर्म कर रहा हूँ." I have been called to perform in some Savai. And with such pride he said that. So, because during my days in Pune, I used to make it a point to go and attend the Savai Gandharv festival every year, which used to last about 4 or 5 days. I could appreciate his sense of pride because, Savai Gandharv festival was set up by late Sri Bhimsen Joshi ji under the tutelage of his Guru Bhai, not Guru Bhai, his Guru, and in the honor of his Guru Savai Gandharv, and there were other people like Vasant Rao Deshpande and all who helped him in this whole enterprise. But coming back to this friend of mine who called me up, and I realized that it is no joke as a classical vocalist in this country called India to be performing in front of a crowd of 10,000 people who sit through the entire evening, beginning at some 5:30 or 6 in the evening and lasting all the way till 12 o'clock in the midnight. It is the strength of that institution which has been created by Pandit Bhimsen Joshi. The Savai Gandharv Mahotsav. There are similar, couple of other such institutions. My home city of Patna used to have one, but in the great brouhaha that took place in my state in the last 30 years. All of that has disappeared. But, there's one in Amritsar. There's, of course, the Dover Lake Festival in Kolkata. But, talking about institutions, their role is so important. I would urge all of you to find the time to go down south in the winters and go to Chennai and figure out the kind of vibrant cultural dynamics that take place during the sabhas of Tamil Nadu, during the sabhas of Chennai. There's of course a big debate raging in Carnatic music today because of something that T.N. Krishna has said, but I will not go into that debate. But all that I'm trying to say is that, again, talking about our own pride, our cultural pride, any Tamilian who's a music lover from across the world at least tries to make an effort to be in the city of Chennai, to be able to attend, to be able to catch up on at least a couple of those sabhas during the winter, end of December, early January. That is the kind of attachment that they have to their culture, and that is the kind of institution. Again, an institution, not a mitti or cement ka institution, an intangible institution, the Sangeet Sabhas of Tamil Nadu. They have created it, and it is being nurtured, nourished through generations because of the patronage of people who are so deeply rooted in their culture. So there also, I don't remember the name of the institution, which is the nodal institution for running these Sangeet Sabhas, but under its aegis, they do it year after year, and again, there is enough support from all across the world for these sabhas. You can just imagine if somebody like Sundar Pichai or what that other Google guy, I'm forgetting the name. Satya Nadella. I mean, these guys just, pick up a point percentage of their overall budget and farm it out to the Sangeet Sabhas of Tamil Nadu. How rich they would be. And indeed, it is. I am told that it is happening. That is the kind of patronage they are getting from across the world. And IT professionals from down south, they are also supportive of these institutions. And that is how, over the years, over more than 75 years, these Sangeet Sabhas have been an iconic institution in the cultural domain of our country. And I would end by saying, what I referred to very briefly in my last lecture also, that we can hone our skills, we can refine our skills, we can upscale our abilities only, as I had said earlier, if we, not necessarily adversary, but are competitor. Competition probably is not a very good word in the world of ethics, but when you move from the world of ethics to the real world, then it is something that you cannot wish away, and this competition is what can be sustained only through institutions, and the better the institutions that we have, the better the institution, the better the competition, and the better the output. So I would stop here, and as has been said, I'm willing to take whatever questions you have on these two separate themes that I have talked about. Thank you.